What's up, everybody? Welcome into Group Chat Sports. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want the latest in transfer portal, recruiting news, and coaching movement, which today, the story we're talking about definitely falls under that category. And it was, I think at the time when we talked about it, a very surprising move. Jim Knowles going from Ohio State to Penn State as defensive coordinator, coming off a national championship. And at the time, we were trying to justify it or trying to find reasons. And the story is now out. And it seemed like he was the one who reached out to Penn State.
Yeah, look, we've only seen one side of the story. So make that very clear. We're just seeing what Jim Knowles is telling people publicly. He seems pretty candid about it. But again, there's two sides to every story. So we're hearing the Jim Knowles side. But it sounds like a matter of communication and timing, which so many of these things often come down to, and a perceived lack of respect. He didn't say that, but you get that through the comments. And again, one side of the story. So what he's saying is basically, look, he wanted to have his contract done with Ohio State before the national championship game because he thought it would be a distraction. Turns out that wasn't the case. And then right after the national championship, which is crazy, I mean, a professional peak, something you work so hard for, he's immediately reaching out to other schools. And this was a time when you had a tremendous market for defensive coordinators. Tom Allen had just left to Clemson. So you're talking about Penn State needing a defensive coordinator. Oklahoma needed a defensive coordinator. You had Notre Dame needed a defensive coordinator. Some of the top schools in the country needed a defensive coordinator. Obviously great for a guy like Knowles, who's coming off a defense that was number one in points allowed, yards per game, yards per play, red zone touchdown percentage. I mean, this was his peak value and the market was hot. So he didn't say that, but I'm sure that had a lot to do with him realizing, hey, I can get a lot of money. Didn't seem like Ohio State was ready to go to the top of the market for Jim Knowles. Maybe they thought that they recruited the players that allowed him to play that way, right? The defensive ends, the defensive tackles, the linebackers, the safeties, the corners. You guys were all drafted. So if you're Ohio State, maybe you're saying, hey, we had a lot to do with you having these opportunities. We're not going to pay you extra. Go somewhere else. Ohio State ultimately did enter to the contract negotiations after national championship, but it sounded like Knowles at that point had already gotten these other offers. And from his standpoint, he said that not being invited to the championship parade 2 days later was something that made it, to use his words, awkward.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me as well, as you see here in the excerpt of the story, is that before Knowles reached out to James Franklin, it seemed like they were getting pretty close to making their decision. So at that point, though, it's got to be a no-brainer for Franklin to make it happen.
It makes you wonder, like, what Penn State was, what was happening there as far as like who they were working on. But the salary's there. This is $3.1 million annually for Knowles public school. They got to disclose all that. So we know $3.1 million is a ton. This is a guy who grew up in Philadelphia, went to St. Joe's Prep, grew up watching Penn State, Joe Paterno and all those guys. So this is also a 60-year-old guy. So he's kind of towards the end here of his career, you would think. So to opportunity to cash in, play at a place that he grew up watching was too much for him to turn down. Also, Penn State's had a run here of some great defensive coordinator, at least defensive performances, which has prompted those defensive coordinators to get head coaching jobs and to do great things. So you talk about Brent Pry going from Penn State to Virginia Tech as the head coach. Manny Diaz going from Penn State to Duke as the head coach. Allen going from Penn State to Clemson as DC, but getting a big raise to do it. And now Jim Knowles entering the seat. Franklin's going to recruit some of the best defensive athletes in the country, so it makes sense. But I think also from a Penn State standpoint, feels like some of this is thumbing your nose at Ohio State. You haven't gotten that many wins over them lately as far as just the pecking order. So maybe this is a way to get a win over Ohio State and take that W.
Well, and if you're Ohio State, if you're an Ohio State fan, I don't know that these explanations are making too much sense still.
Yeah, and look, it might be if you're Ohio State, you're saying, am I going to pay $3.1 million for a defensive coordinator, or am I going to hire a younger guy and just continue to recruit the Caleb Downs of the world, who was not cheap coming out of the portal, those 5-star defensive ends who needed to be replaced, and they've done a good job in the portal trying to replace those guys. They're continuing to recruit that position as well. Defensive tackle, same thing. You need a portal help at the defensive line to replace what you had. But if you're Ohio State, you're looking at like, we're Ohio State. We're going to play great defense because of what we bring on talent-wise. Now, Ohio State was in a little bit of a low point, relatively speaking, before Knowles took over. So it's not like you're guaranteed to have a top 5 defense just because you have, the scarlet and gray. But
you're also replacing him with someone who's got a nice track record. Maybe not recently, but you have faith that he's going to be able to do the job there.
Yeah, and I think it really, at the end of the day, defensive football, so much of it comes down to the players that you have. I mean, your particular defensive linemen, guys that are just hard to find at other schools, right? There's only, you look at the first round of the draft, the second round of the draft, there's only so many of these guys walking around. You look at a guy like Matt Patricia, who you bring in and has the NFL knowledge. At the NFL level, there's parity with defensive talent. I mean, everybody's drafting the same guys. Everybody has the same amount of money. Everybody has the same cracks at the apple in the draft.
He's going to feel like it's cheating.
You're right. Look at this. It's just to look at Ohio State, this year in the draft, right? In terms of just on the defensive side of the ball, what are you looking at? Okay, so you have Tyleik Williams, first round pick, defensive tackle, going to the Detroit Lions. Then second round, JT Tuimoloau going to Indianapolis. Then you got Cody Simon in the fourth round going to the Cardinals. Lathan Ransom, who was so huge for them during this run, in the fourth round going to Carolina. Jack Sawyer, fourth round going to Pittsburgh. Ty Hamilton, fifth round going to the Rams. Jordan Hancock going to the Bills, fifth round. Denzel Burke going to the Cardinals, fifth round. So just on the defensive side of the ball, you're talking about first round pick, second round pick, 3 fourth round picks, 3 fifth round picks. That's a haul. If you're talking about just in general, an NFL team with that many picks, you say they have a ton of picks. This is just on the defensive end, just for one college team. So you like to think that a guy like Matt Patricia that knows what he's doing from an X's and O's standpoint, if you give him the personnel advantage that he didn't have in the NFL, you are going to have a very successful defense. So I understand it from Ohio State's perspective. They're the champs. They don't have to get desperate for a defensive coordinator. And then Penn State, they're on the climb. They're trying to catch Ohio State. So this is a win they can get in their minds over Ohio State. So from both perspectives, it makes sense. From Knowles' perspective, he wants more money. He also mentioned, by the way, in the article that there's a lot of pressure at Ohio State, and that got to him a little bit. Didn't say it in those words, but he mentioned it's a little different in terms of the expectations, the fact that if you give up a touchdown in a 62-7 game, people are going to be asking questions, to use his terminology. But some pressure to Penn State too, especially when you're the highest paid defensive coordinator in the sport. And the pressure for sure is going to be to stop Julian Sain and to beat Penn State, of course, to beat Michigan as well, when those teams cross paths and then win that Big Ten championship. So a lot of pressure in this situation, but this is big time football. Big Ten, arguably the best conference in college football right now. And this is just another sign of the times for football in that conference.
Remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this sort of content. Ohio State fans, always great with your support on the channel. So we got a lot more coming for you over the summer here. Thank you all for watching today. See you guys soon.